Hello, AP World History students. So I am not here to help you with this particular practice, DBQ. What this video is going to do is to introduce against a couple of these skills, give a couple reminders, refreshers, and then in this video, my intention is to walk you through this particular practice, DBQ, about Portuguese maritime trade empires. And if you want to use this resource, and like as I'm walking us through the documents, you can certainly do that. If you elect to, stop the video and try and read through it on your own or read through it with a friend, that is your option as well. So either way, take it away from this point on. So let me introduce a couple things and just remind us of some basic points for the DBQ. We recall on the rubric, the thesis, the contextualization, those work the exact same as they do on an LEQ. No further, I don't need to say anything more on that at this point. There are three evidence points available to us. The easiest is to describe the content of three of the documents. And again, when you're using the documents, do not quote them, please, but describe what's going on in them. The medium or the more advanced evidence point is to accurately describe the content of 6 of the 7 documents and use that to support your thesis argument. And then the most advanced evidence point, the one that's easier said than done, but certainly doable for us, is the outside evidence, where you're taking some piece of information that you have from your brain, not from the documents or the prompt, and you're using that to support your argument as well. Historical complexity is just the continual process of finding nuance, complexity, explaining all the similarities or differences, or in this case, the changes and the continuities, explaining that, in rich detail, finding subtle differences between the documents, even if you say some documents are similar. It's just that continual process of going above and beyond. And then the sourcing point, which is the newest skill for us, where it's just you are kind of the narrator in the room. You're kind of looking to the reader and saying, here's what's going on with this document, right? Here's why this particular writer is doing this. Or this document here is a really great example of this broader process. And sourcing is a tricky skill, which is why I provide the sourcing cheat sheet for every DBQ that you do. And I really want to encourage you to use these sentence stems, students. I think this will help you along. Now, these sentence stems alone might not do it. You might need to add in more explanation, but I really want to point you to these as a way to help, kind of training wheels for that sourcing skill. And again, I point you to this particular one where it says this document is a good illustration of the effects of this particular historical process or situation or context, and then tell me how that connects to the document. This is the one where I think students are able to hit the target most frequently. Some general tips. We're going to try and avoid, I didn't see much of this, but sometimes, depending on what online videos you're watching, and that can be a really great idea, but sometimes students will start doing sourcing analysis by saying this source is obviously biased. And I just caution us from that. Now, sources might be biased. I think actually, frankly, most content, most documents are biased in one way or another. It's not enough to just say it's biased. You'd have to explain how it is biased and how that bias shows up in the language. It's much more complex than just saying this is obviously biased. That's just sort of something where we're going to have to, if I can just say it, that's kind of like a middle school kind of level argument. And I need us to kind of develop our work beyond that. Go one at a time through the documents. Like always describe one document at a time. Don't try and group 2 or 3 documents together and describe them as a group. You're likely to miss some of the evidence points there. Remember, like, let's say you have 2 documents that are, doing something similar, and you have them together in a grouping, which is good. That's like the normal thing that you should be doing. If you can point out, yes, these are similar, and they both prove this part of my argument, but a subtle difference between them is blank. That can be I call it here, that's kind of a flex move. That's like showing that complex thinking to your reader. That's an excellent way of making sure you're grabbing all the possible analysis points. And again, through every document you pass through, you ask yourself as you're reading the document, okay, what does this have to do with the prompt? How does this help me answer the prompt, right? And with the sourcing, like how can I explain what's going on with this document? How can I explain why this author was doing this? How can I explain the way that this document is written? How can I explain, again, the broader historical moment that would make sense of this document, or that this document is just a perfect illustration of. The particular practice DBQ that we're going to do here is comes from the 2019 national exam. So it was recently used. I find it to be very fair. It's like a moderate difficulty DBQ. One of the harder parts of it is that there's a lot of reading to it. And that was something students came back the first, from the test. They said, man, they felt like kind of longer documents. So the reading at the front end is a little bit longer, but I don't think it's too hard to figure out what to do with it. And if we can use this one, again, going slowly, working with friends, taking some time, then I think we can really say we're growing toward this skill area. So this has to do with this process of maritime empires. Again, European states establishing empires overseas. The prompt, again, if you're gonna do this on your own, just stick with me for a tiny bit longer. The prompt in this case, as you read it, says, evaluate the extent to which the Portuguese transformed maritime trade in the Indian Ocean in the 16th century. So that's the 1500s, right? We're looking in the Indian Ocean. To what extent did the Portuguese transform trade? So we're thinking back to Indian Ocean Trade Network. To what extent did they change the game in the Indian Ocean? And again, to what extent we know how to use that language. We imagine the spectrum. On one side, we'd say they completely changed everything about the Indian Ocean Trade Network, or nothing changed about the Indian Ocean Trade Network with the arrival of the Portuguese. So that's what we're going to be looking at here. We're looking for changes and continuities. That's our historical thinking skill. What's changing here, and what is staying the same? And consider to yourself or with the person near you, what ideas do we have to contextualize this, right? So our story, or the prompt topic is the 1500s. It's the Portuguese and it's the Indian Ocean Trade Network. Can we back up and tell the backstory of anything there? How can we contextualize any of that? Okay. If you are going to try this on your own, then you can try it on your own now. If you want me to walk with you through it, then I'm going to just walk us with you. I'll walk with you on it right now. The DBQ actually started with this. This isn't a document. This is just sort of like a little note to the student. It says, the map below shows some of the locations mentioned in the documents and is provided as a reference. The map is not one of the 7 documents. The documents begin on the next page. So there's occasionally like a place reference, like you'll see a reference to Aceh or Bengal or Cambay. You'll see references to these places. I think they just give us this to give us a map and help us have some sense of what they're talking about. Okay. Document 1. Again, the prompt, to what extent did the Portuguese transform maritime trade in the 16th century? The source, advice given in 1500 by Muslim merchants of Calicut to the Hindu ruler of Calicut concerning the arrival of the second Portuguese expedition to the city, recorded in the History of the Discovery and Conquest of India by the Portuguese by Fernão Lopes de Castaneda, a Portuguese historian, published in 1551. So Muslim merchants in an Indian city to the Hindu ruler of an Indian city. It reads, Your Majesty, we are astonished that you should lower yourself by receiving these Portuguese enemies into your kingdom, who seem to be pirates rather than merchants. We, your Muslim subjects, have always been loyal to you and have brought valuable foreign merchandise to this country and have exported its native products to increase your revenue greatly. You appear to forget all this by receiving these newcomers into your favor, as if your own numerous and faithful subjects were incompetent for the purpose. In this you dishonor yourself and embolden these strangers to hold your power in contempt. The true intent of the Portuguese coming into these seas is to take possession of your city and not to trade for spices as they pretend. The place you have given them for a trading post they will convert into a fort, from where they will make war on you when you least expect it. We say these things to you out of goodwill rather than out of any desire for profit. For if you do not listen to our advice, there are other cities on India's Malabar coast from which we can conduct our trade in spices. Interesting. So to what extent does it sound like the Portuguese are transforming maritime trade? Why would these Muslim merchants be doing this? Why would they be appealing to the Hindu ruler in this way? Is this a good example of something in particular? What's happening here with this document? If you need more time, pause the video. I'm moving on to document 2. Document 2, Duarte Barbosa, a government official employed in a Portuguese trading post on the Malabar coast. A travel narrative published in Portugal, 1516. So this is a Portuguese official. The Muslims in Calicut are rich and live well, and they used to control all the sea trade from that town. Indeed, if the King of Portugal had not discovered India, Malabar would already have been in the hands of the Muslims. In addition to the local Muslims, there are also foreign Muslims in Calicut, such as Arabs, Persians, and Gujaratis. They are great merchants, sail to all parts of the world with their goods, and have their own Muslim leader who rules over them and disciplines them as necessary without the Hindu king of Calicut meddling with them. And before the king of Portugal discovered the country, the Muslim traders were so numerous and powerful in the city of Calicut that the Hindus did not dare to enter into disputes with them. And after the king of Portugal made himself master there, and these Muslims saw that they could not defend their position there, they began to leave Calicut, so that very few of them remain today. To what extent did the Portuguese transform maritime trade in the Indian Ocean region in the 16th century? Did we get any evidence here? Is document 2 telling a similar story to document 1? Can we not tell yet? Why would this particular government official be telling the story in this way? Okay, moving on to document 3. The source here is an anonymous Portuguese court official's letter of advice to King Sebastian of Portugal regarding a proposal to conclude a peace treaty and establish free trade with the Ottoman Empire, mid-1560s. So a Portuguese official writing to his boss, ultimately writing to the King of Portugal, regarding the idea of should we make a treaty that just establishes open free trade with the Ottoman Empire, the Muslim Ottoman Empire. This person says, if the Turks were allowed to travel freely to India and establish their own trading posts and trade in merchandise wherever they wanted, your Majesty's own profits would suffer greatly. If that were to happen, all the business handled by our merchants would immediately fall to the Turks because their empire is much closer to India. The duration of their voyages, their transportation costs, the risks they would face, and the damage they would sustain to their ships and their merchandise would be less than half of that suffered by our own ships. Portugal's state monopoly in pepper and other controlled spices would also be threatened by allowing the Turks to establish trade in India. Even now, when they have not been able to openly compete against us, it is known that they conduct trade in secret, carrying spices to Persia, Bengal, Southeast Asia, and China, and especially to their own markets, despite our efforts to stop them. Thus, if the Turks are allowed to operate freely, their ties with local Muslims would make them even better informed and better organized than us, so that they could send as much pepper as they wanted by means of the Red Sea and Persian Gulf and become masters of the lion's share of the trade in spices. So what are we seeing? To what extent are the Portuguese transforming trade in the Indian Ocean region? How are things different or similar to how things had gone in the past? What has the arrival of the Portuguese done here? Is this telling a similar story to Docs 1 and 2? Or is it telling a different kind of story or a different part of the answer? Why would this official be given this advice? What broader patterns or broader context gives us shines some light on this, where we'd say, yeah, this is a great example of that. Okay, document 4. The source here, Aladdin Riyad Sia al-Kahar, ruler of the Sultanate of Aceh, a Muslim state on the island of Sumatra, Indonesia, a letter to the Ottoman Sultan Suleiman I. So this is a ruler of a Muslim state in Indonesia writing to the Muslim Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. Two kings talking to each other, two Muslim rulers talking to each other. He writes, "It is our firm belief that if your Majesty better understood the circumstances of Aceh and our long struggle against the miserable Portuguese infidels, your imperial compassion would be awakened, As you know, the pilgrim and merchant vessels from all the ports of Indonesia must pass through the Maldive Islands on their way to Mecca and the Red Sea. And between all 24,000 Maldive Islands, there are just 4 channels where a ship can pass safely. The Portuguese wait around the entrances of these channels. When our ships arrive there, the Portuguese stop and take possession of as many as they can. Any ship they cannot capture, they sink with cannon fire, either leaving the Muslims aboard to drown or capturing and enslaving them. The Portuguese have even dared attack Ottoman ships belonging to Your Majesty. For example, in the year 1565, your officials came to Aceh and left for Istanbul loaded with pepper, silk, cinnamon, cloves, and other products from Indonesia. Portuguese vessels intercepted the ship at the Maldives and sank it. 500 Muslims drowned. The rest were enslaved. So, we request that Your Imperial Majesty grant us siege cannons and ask that you instruct the Ottoman governors of Egypt and Aden to allow our representatives to come to Your Majesty's illustrious court and obtain all the horses, armor, and other weapons that we will need for our defense against the Portuguese. To what extent have the Portuguese transformed trade in the Indian Ocean region in the 16th century, gang? Let's source this. Why would the king of Aceh write this to Suleiman I? Why would he be doing that? What's going on here? Why write to him? Why not write to some other king or sultan or ruler somewhere else? Why not go to China or some other place? Why do this? Is there any part of the language here where you'd say, oh yeah, I can tell their particular point of view this way? Is this a good example of some broader historical context going on? Or does any of this maybe just remind us of some outside evidence that we know about what happened here in this area? Document 5. Zainuddin Makhdoom al-Sagir, a Muslim religious scholar and historian from Calicut, southern India, in an address to southern Indian Muslims, written circa 1570. So a religious scholar speaking to Indian Muslims. After the Portuguese had established themselves in Cochin on the Malabar coast, they forced every vessel, however small, to carry a safe conduct pass, which was issued for a certain fee. The Portuguese, in imposing this toll, claimed that it would improve commerce. To enforce the toll, they seized the cargo and crew of any ship that did not have its pass. So you have to buy a safe conduct pass from the Portuguese, and they said this will make it simpler, and if you didn't have one, then they'll seize the cargo. In addition to this system of persecution, the Portuguese deployed ships all over the Indian Ocean to lie in wait and intercept vessels. In this way, they unjustly acquired vast wealth and captured countless prisoners. Soon, as a result of this lengthy conflict with the Portuguese, the ruler of our city of Calicut almost entirely exhausted his treasure and resources, and his kingdom became strained to the limit. Because he was tired of war, the prince entered into a treaty in 1515 allowing the Portuguese to build a fort in Calicut in exchange for allowing his subjects to send 4 ships every year to Arabian ports. Afterward, the Portuguese set about building their fortifications while the merchants of Calicut prepared 4 ships loaded with pepper and ginger for dispatch to the Arabian coast, and at the same time resumed trading with Gujarat and other foreign ports while carrying with them the passes from the Portuguese. To what extent have the Portuguese transformed maritime trade in the Indian Ocean? We're probably hearing some changes. What are some continuities? What are some things, guys, that are staying the same about trade in the Indian Ocean? What else are we noting here, right? What groupings could we put together? What are we seeing about different ways that things are being transformed or changed? Document 6. Cesare Federici, a Venetian trader in The Voyage and Travel to East India, published in Venice, 1587, so a European perspective. In the city of Canbay, in northwestern India, Hindu brokers of great authority have traditionally handled all the transactions at the port. And the Portuguese merchants observed this custom. Every foreign merchant who does business in the country has his own broker who works with him in buying and selling his merchandise. So he's saying every trader, Portuguese or Muslim or whatever, has a broker at this particular port in India, like a Hindu person who's kind of there to help make the deal happen. When a new fleet of ships arrives into port at Canbay, the brokers come to the dock and the foreign merchants give them all their cargo. The merchants carefully note all the bundles and packs of goods that they are giving to the brokers, and the brokers command their servants to take the merchants and lodge them in one of the many houses kept for this purpose. The broker says to the merchants, "Go and take your rest while I conduct your trade." After Goa, Cochin is the most important base the Portuguese have in southwestern India. Much of the merchandise designed for the Kingdom of Portugal originates there. Inland from Cochin is the pepper-producing region. But the pepper that goes to Portugal from Cochin is not as good as the pepper that goes to Arabia and Persia, because the Portuguese made a contract with the King of Cochin to buy the pepper at a very low price. Because of that, the Indian pepper growers bring their worst produce to the Portuguese and sell them the pepper that's green and full of filth. Meanwhile, we presume the good pepper is going to go to the Muslim ports or Muslim destinations in Arabia and Persia. To what extent have the Portuguese transformed maritime trade here? What are we seeing? What changes have they brought about? What broader pattern, what broader historical situation is this an example of, perhaps? How can we make sense of what this person is saying and writing? Is this a pro-Portuguese perspective? Is it a pro-Muslim perspective? What do we see? Last one. This one confounded some students. A box. Inlaid box made in Gujarat, India for export to Portugal circa 1600. Teak and ebony and other precious hardwoods with ivory details. It's a picture of a box. Some clues. This is a luxury good, given how they describe it. And when you look at the image, it shows a light-skinned European hunting exotic animals. So who would be the audience for this? Who is this for? By the way, another AP World History teacher who was at a museum once sent this picture and said, "I found the box. This is the box from that prompt." So here's another look at the box, the famous box for the Portuguese market. Here's the original document. Here it is from a friend's photograph. So that's our prompt. Evaluate the extent to which the Portuguese transformed maritime trade. We're trying to summarize changes and continuities. What changed? What stayed the same? All right. Try and include some exception or nuance if you can. And if it helps you, here is a great sample body paragraph from a student. And I'll just finish by reading this aloud, guys. A student wrote this. Now, don't copy it word for word, but if you're using some of the same arguments or ideas, I'm okay with that. We're doing training wheels still. They wrote, "The Portuguese greatly changed the Indian Ocean trade network by monopolizing trade and mistreating Muslim merchants. Muslim merchants had previously been the most common and dominant traders in the Indian Ocean trade network. Muslim merchants were respectful of the kings, even Hindu kings, and helped their economy. These merchants saw their predictable downfall with the arrival of the Portuguese, document 1. The Portuguese began to intercept ships, steal goods, and drown or imprison passengers. The unfair treatment of Muslim merchants and all those who weren't Portuguese was horrible, document 4. In document 1, the anti-Portuguese tone was evident when they called them enemies, is most likely due to their worry that the trade with the Portuguese will harm their profits, sourcing. Similarly, in document 4, the author's use of the word infidel clearly shows a negative point of view toward the Catholic Portuguese, describing them in religiously loaded derogatory term, sourcing. Documents 1 and 4 show the mistreatment and displacement of the Muslim merchants and their hostile attitudes in response." All right, I've walked us a bunch of the way, maybe halfway there. You got to put your argument together and try and write this out. But students, I believe that you can. Please have this one ready on Thursday. I would like you to show up with this practice essay completed on Thursday. I'll grade it and then we'll talk about it, but you're going to do great. Your prayers today are appreciated as I'm attending this funeral, but thank you guys so much. Good luck the rest of the way. Email me if any questions pop up. Thanks, gang.